Okay, so now that we have seen some general idea how to design a block cipher, let's see some specific lightweight examples. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is HIGHT. HIGHT is a lightweight block cipher designed by Hong et al. In 2006. And it was shown to be highly convenient for extremely constrained devices for like RFID tags and sensor networks. At that time, the word IoT wasn't around. So, okay, so if it were, they will say that it is suitable for IoT. So it became a standard encryption algorithm in South Korea, and I think it's still a standard there, national standard. Also, it is in ISO standards for block ciphers. Generalized unbalanced phase-style network, its structure, and the block size is 64 bits, key size is 128 bits, and number of rounds is 32. So it was published in CHES 2006. Okay, so this was around the time when academicians designed lightweight ciphers. So it is interesting because at that time when you design a lightweight cipher, or if you wrote a cryptanalysis paper on lightweight block ciphers, I remember that my paper got rejected, and I found the best attacks on height and present block ciphers. And around 2008, it was rejected, but the reviewer comments were something like this: these block ciphers are really bad. So they deny every knowledge for the last 100 years that crypto community gained. So the reviewers were angry that we are trying to analyze them and publishing papers about them, this way encouraging those people. So people were really angry that there are this kind of ciphers and people try to break them, because they thought that these are bad designs. But they didn't understand is that they were deliberately bad designs, because aim was not to provide the best security. Their aim was to, for instance, for the case of height, their aim was to make it low, should have low hardware footprint. So it was very hard for the academic community to accept that there are this kind of designs. So after our paper got rejected, height and present actually became ISO standards. Okay, so the changes is not always easy. So in the original paper, they showed that AES requires around 3400 gate equivalents, but height requires less gates equivalents, but the throughput is higher. But this is one of the problems in hardware comparisons, since they're not using the same technology. Actually, trying to compare them doesn't make much sense. But people generally don't have the same platform to compare these devices. There are some papers where they make it even lower with respect to gate equivalents. And there are some papers which shows height is faster than some other lightweight designs on 8-bit microcontrollers. So at the time, it was a good option, but nowadays I don't think that anybody is using it, maybe in South Korea. But anyway, there are many attacks that almost break the whole cipher. So in my master's thesis, since this is 32 rounds, I remember that I broke 26 of it in a single key setting, but 31 rounds in the related key setting. So this is not a good sign when you have designed something 32 rounds and people start breaking almost the whole cipher. Then this is a bad sign, and generally it is not a good idea to make it a standard. This is why ISO people didn't want it to become an ISO lightweight block cipher standard. Okay, so the picture is like this. You have the master key, and from the master key, as you can guess, you do the key schedule and produce initial keys, generally referred to as whitening keys, and round keys sometimes referred to as sub keys. Okay, so each round you use 4 bytes of the master, 4 bytes of round key that comes from the master key. So in our papers, we did the following table, which helped us a lot. Because if you know the key schedule, sometimes it helps you to break the cipher better. Because we realized that the original key consists of 16 bytes, as you can see from MK0 to MK15. And the key schedule actually makes small operations on these bytes to produce subkeys. So this table actually tells you that if you know the value of MK0, the first byte or the last byte, depends on how you actually number it, but if you know this byte of the master key, this means that you also know this whitening key and this subkeys. So during the attack, instead of trying to guess both of these bytes, you try to guess this one and obtain the whole row. So this actually helped us a lot to break the cipher faster. So the block cipher height is like this. So let's go back. Recall that the block size was 64 bits. And now instead of a single phase style round, this is a generalized phase style round, phase style cipher. So there isn't only left and right part. There are like 8 lanes here, right? So as I told you, this is 64 bits. So each line here actually represents a byte, 8-bit value. Okay. So your plain text, 64 bits, is divided into 8 bytes. And these operations are performed. So as you can see, they look identical, but one difference is that you change the place of XOR and modular addition here. Okay. And there's an F0 function here and F1 function here. So it looks as if there is much, but actually F0 and F1 are just these operations. So for instance, if this byte X comes here and fed as the input here, then this input X is rotated 1 bit to left, 2 bit to left, and 7 bits to left, and the results are XORed, and the result is produced here. So it is just a rotation XOR, okay? So these are actually linear operations, so only non-linear part is coming from this modular addition. So as you can see, this cipher doesn't have an S-box. This is also counterintuitive for some people because people think that every block cipher should have an S-box, but this doesn't have an S-box. But so this kind of produces diffusion, but the confusion is coming from the modular addition. Okay. So this is where the security lies. But as you can see, this is a very simple design. You can go home and implement it. As you can see, there are only rotations, XORs, modular additions. That's it. And you swap the bytes. So think about this picture repeated 32 times. Okay. That is the full height. So, and there are many attacks you can perform. Okay. So let me move on to another design. This is called CLEFIA, designed by Sony Corporation. So it is an ISO standard for lightweight block ciphers. Sony uses it for digital rights management. So I don't know in which devices they use, but for instance, if you use it for example, in PlayStation 3, and if we can break this cipher, this means that we can, you can play any video game without buying them, because this way you break the digital rights management. So this is important. In a hardware, when you put a cipher inside it, you have to implement it in a secure way, and it should be a secure cipher. So this is why people generally prefer AES. Okay. So as far as I know, nobody break the whole cipher yet. The block size is 128-bit. It provides 3 different key lengths, as in the case of AES, and the number of rounds depends on the key length. Okay, so if your key length is small, the number of rounds is 18. If the key length is large, like 256, the number of rounds also increases to 26. So for some people, this is counterintuitive. Okay, because they think that if we increase the key size, we become more secure, right? So why should we increase the key number of rounds? So they think the opposite should be the case. And actually, if you Google it, most probably you cannot find a good explanation for this. Of course, young generation never use Google. They use ChatGPT, Google Gemini. But ask any AI, a large language model, they will not give you a satisfactory answer. But the shortest answer I can give you is that this actually comes from information theory, because if you look at it, you have an input of 128 bits, and you have a second input, which is the key. For instance, in this case, again, think about 128 bit. So this data should be somehow combined and processed in a very nice way so that the output should look random. So your data is small here, but if you increase the key length, now you have to mix more data. So you have to perform more operations to make it more secure. This is the main motivation behind the information theoretical sense, okay? So best known attacks breaks 13 out of 18 runs. Actually, I think that attack belongs to me, so I'm sorry that I couldn't break the whole cipher and I cannot give you free digital content, okay? Maybe next time. But again, as you can see, it is published in 2007. These were the times when people were designing lightweight designs. So this is also generalized phase style, but instead of 8 lanes like height, we have 4 lanes. And now the block size is 128 bits. So these lines actually represent 32 bits in this case. In height, they were representing a byte, here 32 bits. So as you can see, it also has a round function as F0 and F1. But these round functions are more complicated compared to height because F0 is like this. So you have 32-bit input. Now these lines represent bytes. Okay, 32 bits here. So you XOR it with your round key, then perform 2 different S boxes, S0 and S1, which have 8-bit input and 8-bit output. Then the 32-bit output is multiplied by a matrix and you obtain a 32-bit output. So the confusion is provided by these S boxes. The diffusion is provided by matrix multiplication. Okay, so this is F0, this is F1. The picture is almost identical. And now you have a different matrix here. And instead of S0, S1, S0, S1, you have S1, S0, S1, S0, okay, to make it more complicated. So these metrics, I think, yes, they are here in hexadecimal notation. These are the values you multiply. So if you have a 32-bit here, you write it here, so you multiply and obtain a 32-bit output, okay? So again, in the original paper, they compared with AES again, but not on the same technology, but in a different design. But they show that in almost all scenarios, when you look at speed versus area, CLEFIA gets the best results. Okay. So in your optimization, you might focus on area, for instance. So this way you require less gates, but also this reduces your speed. But if you focus on speed, now you require more area, but obtain more speed. So this is why there are many different optimization methods and so on. Okay. But in general, their aim is to show that they are faster than AES. So for this reason, on lightweight devices, instead of AES, they should be using this. So this is hardware performance, and this is the software performance. They use assembly language, and I think they simply focus on a single CPU core to obtain results. And here their metric is cycle per byte. So this means that how many cycles your processor should perform to encrypt a single byte. Okay, so here the lower is better actually. Okay. So their aim is to show that they are both good on software and hardware. But the thing is, as I mentioned, that at the ISO standards, we have CLEFIA and present as lightweight standards. CLEFIA is preferred for its software performance because if I go back, operations are on bytes. So it is easier to do it on software. On hardware, present would be faster because, there are bit operations there. Okay. Yeah, but long story short, there's an alternative called CLEFIA designed by Sony, and it is in an ISO standard. So if we move on to present, now we change the design. Until this far, we focused on phase delta ciphers. But with the selection of AES, a lot of focus was given on SPN ciphers because here the design is a little bit different. It consists of 3 layers. Key addition, which simply combines the key material with the plaintext, generally with an XOR operation. You perform substitution layer, which provides confusion, and you perform permutation layer, which provides diffusion. So the most famous example is AES, but we will talk about present since it is a lightweight standard. Okay, so the idea is now this way. So you have the plaintext block here. Again, you produce round keys using the key schedule algorithm from the master key. And you simply generally XOR it with the input, then perform substitution, permutation, round key. So one round consists of this, okay? So you start with the round key XOR, and you finish with the round key. I mean, of course, I'm saying XOR, but of course you can do something else. But generally, you combine it with the key, the output, and provide the ciphertext. So as you can see, if you have the plaintext block or ciphertext block, you cannot go backwards or forward to obtain the intermediate values because you don't know the round key. So capturing a plain text and corresponding ciphertext doesn't allow you to have any information about intermediate values. Also, because of this, you cannot go from here to capture the key. Okay, so this is why we also finish with a round key. If you remove this, then the attacker can perform the inverse of permutation and substitution and come here. So, but the important thing here is that unlike face-style ciphers, when you do the encryption here, you need the inverse operations to perform the encryption, right? Because from ciphertext to go upwards, you have to perform the inverse permutation, inverse substitution. So sometimes in the hardware, this might be more problematic because you have to implement both encryption and decryption. So there's an exception to this. If you turn your block cipher into a stream cipher due to your choice of mode of operation, then you don't need to perform the inverse operations, okay? This I will talk next time when we talk about mode of operation, okay? Especially when you use counter mode of operation, you don't need to inverse of these operations. Okay, so let me first talk about advanced encryption standard. It was designed by two Belgians, John Damon and Vincent Raymond. So it was standardized in 2001 by NIST because Reindel, the original name of the algorithm, won the competition. Other finalists were Serpent, Twofish, RC6, and Mars. They are a little bit famous also, generally included in libraries like OpenSSL, etc., but there's no need for anybody to use them. So the block size is 128 bits. Key length depends on your security level. If you want military grade security, you have to choose 256, but now this from here to here increases number of runs from 10 to 14. So you get a 40% slowdown, but get a military grade security. And since this algorithm is super fast on modern devices, actually there is no need to use short key. I mean, this is not shorts for current technology, but you can also choose this one. For instance, in Zoom, your videos, everybody's videos in the communication, actually, and also their voices, of course, are encrypted with AES 256. So in real time, we communicate with everybody. So encryption is that free that you don't feel any delay. If it were slower, then the Zoom would prefer this one. But our CPUs are really good so that we don't feel any slowdown. But this is valid for our computers. But for small devices, we need lightweight variants, okay? So as far as we know, there are no practical attacks on AES. Nobody ever managed to do that yet. So this is why the whole world uses it. So 99% of the world's encryption is coming from AES, okay? Every WhatsApp message you sent, almost every web page you visited, you communicated with this, okay? And you keep doing that. Okay, so here's a lightweight alternative for that. This is Present, again, ISO standard for lightweight cryptography. This was also designed in 2007 in chess conference. It was first announced. So the block size is now 64 bits. And in this picture, every line actually represents a single bit. There are 64 lines here. Okay. The key length depends on the user. It can be either chosen as 80 bits or 128 bits, but number of runs is fixed for 31 for both round numbers. Sorry, key lengths. But there's no, I mean, if your device is really small and have very small amount of memory, which doesn't allow you to kind of store, 128-bit master key, then it is acceptable to use 80-bit key. But other than that, there's no need to use this variant because it is not secure, okay? With current technology, with hundreds of thousands GPUs, you can break it in some time, which would be very costly, but it is within reach. So this is why it should be avoided. So this is important because when we talk about short keys, people talk about it provides short-term security, but we have to be clear about how short are we talking about, okay? Anyway, let me first explain the design. So this is a single round of Present. Imagine that you put the same picture below it 31 times. And at the final round, you add the round key XOR here. And that is the whole Present. So You have the input 64 bits, you XOR with the round key. So round keys are always 64 bits. It doesn't matter how large the master key is. Round keys are 64 bit, you XOR them. So this is your, if we go back to SPN design, this is your add round key layer, okay? So at the substitution layer, you perform the same S-box 16 times in parallel, okay? So these S-boxes get 4-bit input and provide 4-bit output. And here is the table for the S-box. So in hexadecimal notation, this is the input and this is the output. For instance, if it is all zeros here, then in hexadecimal it is 0. Then the output will be C. And in the integer notation, this will be 12, but in the bit notation, this will be 1, 1, 0, 0. Okay? So this is how you provide confusion. Then the places of the bits are swapped. For instance, this 0 bit stays here. So in the next round, it will also come here. But the first bit goes here. So in the next round, it will affect S4. And this one goes here, and it will affect S8, and this bit goes to S2, okay? So this way you provide confusion. So this way, if you only make a small change in the input, like by flipping this bit, like 4 or 5 rounds later, it will affect all of the S-box. So after 31 rounds, it will affect the ciphertext completely. So this way, people won't be able to capture much information from this, okay? So let me show you the key schedule. The 80-bit key schedule works like this. You keep the 80-bit key as a register here. Then the leftmost 64 bits of it, this register, is considered the round key. So initially, here you are XORing with this leftmost 64 bit of your master key. Okay. Then you perform some operations on this 80-bit register. First, you rotated 19 bits to the right. Then apply S-box to the leftmost 4 bits. Then at the round counter, which is actually the integer value of the round, like if it is 20 round, it is 20. Okay, so you XOR it to these 5 bits. For instance, if your round count is 31, it is 5 many ones. So this is why it only affects 5 bits. Okay, so here is the picture. So you keep the master key in a register. Okay, so the leftmost 64-bit is your round key. Then you rotated 19 bits to the right. So take this and put it here. So this 19 bits goes here. You perform the S-box operation to the leftmost 4 bits. Then add the round counter as an XOR operation to these 5 bits. Okay. So it looks simple, but generally people do implementation errors. If you move on to 128-bit key, the idea is the same. You keep it in a register. The leftmost 64 bits are always considered the current round key. And this time, instead of 19 bits, you rotated 67 bits to the right. Then apply S-box to the leftmost 4 bits. Apply another S-box to the second leftmost 4 bits. Then at the round counter to these bits, this case. So instead of using 80-bit key, if you use 128-bit key, you only add one more S-box operation, so you don't lose much time when you move on to this version. But of course, memory complexity increases just a little bit because you have to store more bytes now. Okay, so here's an example. This is an example for what happens if you choose your master key as 80 zeros. Okay, so this is in hexadecimal notation, so there are 20 zeros here. So in hexadecimal notation, this will be 80 zeros. Okay, so let's remember what this algorithm was like this. So I put 80 zeros here. So my first round key will be 64 zeros on the left. Then I rotate this, but actually since all of them are zeros, rotating doesn't make any effect. Then I apply S-box to the 4 bits. Recall that all zeros become C here. Then you add the round counter here. So this has the following effect. You take the first 64-bit leftmost bits as your first round key. Then you do the rotation, perform S-box operation. It only affects the leftmost 4 bits, right, due to S-box operation. In the next round, due to rotations and round counter XORs, you have starting to have more ones here. If you continue this way, as you can see, we have still a lot of zeros because this operation, this key schedule, doesn't have much confusion and diffusion. But if you continue a lot, you realize that after some point on, the results starting to look random. But these are your round keys, okay? So this is also a test vector for you. So if you want to implement present, you have to be sure that your implementation is correct, and you can do it by printing on the screen your round keys and check if they match this one, okay? So of course, this is only for the key schedule. Let's assume that this is our secret key and this is our round keys, and assume that I want to encrypt this plaintext, which is also again contains only 64 zeros, okay? All zero block. So let's go back and see what happens from the picture, right? Consider a scenario where all of the inputs are zero. Recall that my round key was also zero. So XORing all zeros with all zeros, you have all zeros as the input of these S boxes. So all of the S box has an input of zero. The output is C. So you end up with C, C, C until here. So this means that output of all of the S boxes are 1, 1, 0, 0, right? But after permutation, there is a trick here. The rightmost 2 bits of the S boxes always stays on this right part, but these 2 bits, which becomes 1, always goes to the left part of this. If you draw a line in the middle, all of the ones goes to the left, all of the zeros goes to the right, due to the choice of this permutation. So after encryption, so these are our round keys. After encryption, this is the output of your first round. 32 ones on the left, 32 zeros on the right. Keep doing this, and your round outputs, after a few rounds, will start to look random, okay? And at the end of the 31st round, this is your output, and if you XOR it with your final round key, this is the ciphertext. So this is your test vector also. If you implement present correctly, encrypting all zeros with the choice of 80-bit all zero secret key, this would be your ciphertext, okay? So this is a very nice test vector to measure if it works correctly, okay? So final picture in the paper where they presented present, they tried to show that, you know, they require very small amount of gate equivalence. So this was their aim. So they tried to show that they are really small on hardware, because as I told you that their main focus was on keeping a low hardware footprint. So they compare it with the other ones, and they said that they are the smallest. Of course, some stream ciphers are smaller than present, but for instance, grain was, people found a lot of attacks, so they updated a lot and a lot, so final versions may not be that small or that fast, okay? So present is a very good option for lightweight ciphers, but this is the 80-bit version. Of course, when you make it 128, probably you need more gate equivalence to store it.